A stark, high-contrast, black-and-white image depicting a towering, ornate structure resembling a grand, historical bank or a monument, but with subtle, unsettling details. Its foundation is visibly composed of rough, dark red stone resembling dried blood, intertwined with shadowy, almost ghostly tendrils that suggest deception. Cracks spiderweb across the polished marble facade, revealing glimpses of a dark, empty void within, evoking fear. The architecture should be imposing and classic, yet subtly distorted and ominous, avoiding any direct human representation. Emphasis is on the texture of materials, the interplay of light and deep shadow, and the symbolic representation of the three pillars: deception, blood, and fear, embedded within the very bones of the structure. The overall mood is somber, reflective, and reveals a sinister undercurrent beneath a veneer of grandeur. Case 1. John D. Rockefeller, the first modern magnate. The turn of the 19th, Tegato de 20, Tega century, wasn't just a change of the calendar. It was the birth of modernity, a world powered by a new alchemy. Oil, and if oil was the gold of the new age, John D. Rockefeller was its inflexible custodian. In 1870, he founded Standard Oil, a company with an ambition that defied the very logic of competition to control everything. He wasn't interested in a slice of the market. He demanded the totality. He started small, flawlessly and cheaply refining kerosene. But soon his vision of monopoly manifested in tactics that history was quick to label efficiency. The truth, however, is that Rockefeller's efficiency was synonymous with ruthless destruction. He used his purchasing power to negotiate with the railroads, ensuring that Standard Oil not only received the lowest rates, but that its competitors were intentionally taxed with exorbitant amounts. In essence, he forced the railroads, arteries of American commerce, to become his silent accomplices in suffocating any rival that dared emerge. When manipulating rates wasn't enough, Standard Oil simply bought the rival. If the rival refused to sell, the tactic changed. Rockefeller did not hesitate to open a competing refinery next door, selling the product at prices so low that the adversary was forced into bankruptcy. With every purchase, every closer, Standard Oil's percentage of control rose 20%, 50%, 75%, until it reached a mythical number: 90% of all oil refining in the United States. He called it industrial cooperation. The newspapers of the time, and the public, called it the monster. Rockefeller's power extended far beyond oil. He controlled the price every American paid for the kerosene to light their home and, consequently, influenced the very quality of life. He became the first great titan of industry to demonstrate that true economic power lay not in creation, but in the absolute control of distribution. This was a crime against a fundamental principle of capitalism: competition. It was the first great corporate crime of the modern era. Public and journalistic pressure, especially the devastating series of articles by Ida Tarbell, finally forced the government to act. Tarbell, whose father had been destroyed by Rockefeller's tactics, wrote about the magnate's immoral tactics, exposing the hidden face of the monopoly. In 1911, after years of legal battle, the U.S. Supreme Court invoked the Sherman Antitrust Act and ordered the breakup of Standard Oil into dozens of regional companies. It was, in theory, the greatest regulatory victory in American history against corporate power. But here lies the irony, the dark magic of capital. When Standard Oil was split, Rockefeller did not lose money. Far from Italiano. He retained stakes in all the new resulting companies: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amico, etc. The division, in fact, multiplied his wealth. Instead of being the sole owner of a single, attacked empire, he became the majority shareholder of dozens of competing companies, each now free to expand globally without the regulatory restraints of the original monopoly. Rockefeller retired, dedicating the last decades of his life to massive philanthropy. He funded universities, hospitals, and medical science, laundering his name with billions of dollars in charity. This is the essence of the architect of greed: building a fortune through the implosion of the market and then using that very fortune to buy social redemption. He wasn't just the first modern billionaire in history. He was the man who codified the rule that the crime against competition can be the most profitable foundation upon which to build a legacy. His empire dissolved, but his wealth, and the model of power he created, only began to shine brighter. Case 2. Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine and charity. If John D. Rockefeller shaped modern capitalism through the monopolization of essential resources, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria decades later would reinvent the same formula with a much more volatile product: cocaine. In the 80s, Escobar's name wasn't just synonymous with drugs, it was synonymous with an empire built upon the perverse logic that crime, if operated on an industrial scale, could surpass the volume and complexity of any legitimate corporation. While the Western world celebrated the economic boom and globalization, Escobar was orchestrating his own distorted version of progress. In Medellin, Colombia, he was a force of nature, a man whose influence stretched from the most humble slums to the highest echelons of government. He didn't earn money, he printed money. It was estimated that the Medellin cartel grossed over $400 million per week. To contextualize, this was the equivalent of one of the world's largest corporations, but with no balance sheets, no shareholders other than his loyal henchmen, and no need to respect any law. He was, without a doubt, a murderer, a genius smuggler. His methods were brutal, his cruelty legendary. Thousands died in his war against the Colombian state, against rival cartels, and against anyone who dared question his dominance. Judges, police officers, politicians, journalists, none were safe from the sight of his hitmen. He turned Colombia into a battlefield, and Medellin, his hometown, into the epicenter of unimaginable violence. The terror he instilled was a business tool as effective as any market strategy. It was fear as a commodity. But, and here lies Escobar's intricate and dark duality, too much of the poor and forgotten population of Medellin. He was not the monster the international media painted. He was El Patrón de Pasajo Bin Hud. While the government proved distant and ineffective, Escobar invested in his community. He built homes for the neediest in the famous Medellin Cintuguirias Medellin, Huitot Slums neighborhood, erected churches, funded soccer fields, and schools. He distributed money in $100 bills in deprived neighborhoods. He was the benefactor, the provider, the savior that politicians could not or would not be. To some, he was the embodiment of evil, a criminal who deserved the relentless hunt by the state and the US. To others, especially those who benefited from his generosity, he was a complex, almost mystical figure, a man who, despite all the blood on his hands, was still capable of a strange kind of pragmatic charity. He understood the power of the people, and he knew that loyalty bought with social benefits was a stronger shield than any army. His philanthropy was not altruism, it was operational security disguised as benevolence. When the manhunt for Escobar reached its brutal climax in 1993, and he was finally killed on the rooftops of Medellin, many thought the drug empire would crumble with him, but the truth is that drug trafficking, instead of disappearing, merely evolved. His business model, crime as a corporation, cartel as a multinational enterprise, became a template. Other cartels, more fragmented, more decentralized, and perhaps more insidious, took over the power vacuum. The cocaine route to the world was already traced. The logistics were already perfect, and the appetite for illicit money had only grown. Escobar proved that, with unlimited resources and an iron will to break every rule, an individual could create a parallel economy as robust and influential as any nation. He didn't just sell a product, he sold a system. He was the precursor of modern narco-trafficking, the perverse visionary who demonstrated how extreme violence could be packaged and sold as an efficient global supply chain service. His legacy is not just a trail of blood and cocaine, but also a dark reflection on the social and economic failures that allow figures like him to thrive. Escobar's charity, viewed through the prism of time, was not redemption, but rather the cynical cement that bound his empire of terror. And devotion, a macabre testimony to how power, even when born from the most abject crime, can take the form of a strange and contradictory figure of a savior. Case 3. Joseph Kennedy, the dynasty's bootlegger. If Rockefeller used monopoly and Escobar used terror, Joseph Patrick Kennedy used a much subtler, and typically American, weapon, the imperfect law. The 1920s in the United States were defined by a monumental moral contradiction. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution had declared the production, transport, and sale of alcoholic beverages illegal. It was prohibition. However, the ban did not eliminate desire. It only drove it into the darkness. Consumption continued, fueled by an insatiable demand, and where the law ended, easy money began. This environment was the perfect breeding ground for a man with the astuteness and lack of scruples of Joseph Kennedy. Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the dynasty that would become America's political royalty, was not a street gangster. He was a financier, a speculator, a master at operating in the gray zone, the thin, lucrative space between what is legal and what is moral. While others smuggled whiskey crudely and violently, Kennedy found the sophisticated path. His plan revolved around medicinal and industrial whiskey. The law, in its myopia, allowed the importation and sale of alcohol for medicinal or sacramental purposes. Kennedy, with his network of contacts and initial capital, obtained licenses to import large quantities of high Scotch and Canadian whiskey under the pretense of being for therapeutic uses. No one needed to be a genius to know that the American public was not suddenly sick, but thirsty. The true masterstroke was in the logistics. Transporting tons of alcohol from Scotland and Canada to the US through clandestine and dangerous routes required more than just fast boats. It required protection, and protection during Prohibition was a service provided exclusively by the underworld. Persistent rumors and historical investigations suggest that Joseph Kennedy established a business bridge with notorious figures in organized crime, possibly including mafia leaders like Meyer Lansky. This was not a friendship, but a cold commercial transaction. The mafia would ensure that Kennedy's shipments arrived at the port without being stolen by rival gangs or seized by corrupt federal agents. In exchange, Kennedy guaranteed these same groups a consistent high-quality source of supply. Joseph Kennedy was, therefore, at the center of an ambiguous power network, trading on Wall Street by day and securing liquor distribution for the mafia by night. He was not a criminal in the mold of Escobar. He was a crime facilitator who used the law to his advantage, profiting immensely from government regulatory failure. He illegally sold whiskey to bootleggers, who, in turn, illegally sold it to speakeasies across America. The distinction, for Kennedy, was purely juridical. His vision, however, was long-term. While Prohibition was in effect, he accumulated capital, but he foresaw the end of the ban. When the political climate changed and the repeal of the 18th Amendment became inevitable, Kennedy made his second master. He invested heavily in distribution licenses before the repeal was finalized. When Prohibition was finally abolished in 1933, America was thirsty, and the market was empty. Joseph Kennedy did not just have stocks of imported whiskey, he had the most valuable distribution licenses in the country. He was positioned to dominate the legalized liquor market overnight. He emerged from the shadow of illegality to the center of legitimate commerce, an undisputed millionaire. The fortune he built from this maneuver was the silent engine that propelled his family's ascent. Had it not been for the vast, illicit capital from Prohibition, the dream of having a son in the White House, John F. Kennedy, would have been financially and politically impossible. Joseph Kennedy bought influence, built a name, and most importantly, financed his son's ambition to the highest echelons of global power. Joseph Kennedy's crime was not just technical smuggling, it was the erosion of institutional integrity. He demonstrated that capital, no matter how dirty its origins, can buy respect, legitimacy, and finally, rewrite his own family's history. The shadow of the bootlegger who associated with the underworld became the foundation upon which one of the most idealized presidents in American history was built. The Kennedy dynasty, with all its brilliance and tragedy, is a powerful dark reminder that sometimes the shortest bridge between the underworld basement and the steps of the White House is built with cases of illegal whiskey. Case 4. The Oligarchs, the Theft of the Nation. If the fortunes of Rockefeller, Escobar, and Kennedy were built on monopolization, terror, and legal manipulation, the rise of the Russian oligarchs in the 1990s is, perhaps, the most audacious and modern example of how crime can be directly translated into geopolitical power. Their crime was not against competition or morality, but rather a theft of public assets on a scale unprecedented in the history of capitalism. The catalyst was the collapse of the Soviet Union. When the Berlin Wall fell, communism did not just take an ideology with it. It left behind what was, essentially, an empire of ownerless assets. Factories, oil wells, gas mines, metallurgy companies, all valued at trillions of dollars, were suddenly available, with no regulatory structures to protect them. It was the largest and most chaotic transfer of wealth in history. In this vacuum of power and law, a handful of men with the vision, the audacity and the right connections emerged to seize everything. These were the oligarchs. The way they acquired these colossal assets can hardly be called buying. It was, in fact, an acquisition through using the emerging privatization schemes. These individuals, many of whom were former bureaucrats or had direct ties to the KGB and the dying elites, managed to purchase vast state industries that beat in, heart of the Russian economy. Symbolic prices often for mere cents on the dollar of real value. This was made possible through manipulated auctions, fraudulent loans, and, fundamentally, through the systemic corruption of a newborn political class desperate for capital. They didn't steal money. They stole entire nations, taking possession of the infrastructures that kept Russia running. Suddenly, a small group of individuals held total control over Europe's energy supply, access to essential minerals, and the industrial backbone of a transitioning superpower. Their crime does not end in Russia. To protect this newly acquired wealth, they needed to hide it from Russian political instability and international investigations. This is where money laundering reached its peak of sophistication and visibility. Russian capital flowed into the West in a flood through banks and tax havens in London, Cyprus, the British Virgin Islands, and Dubai. The city of London, in particular, became the preferred destination, the legitimizing mechanism. They used this money to buy luxury properties, football clubs, gigantic yachts, and, crucially, political influence. By injecting billions into the Western economy, the oligarchs ensured that global financial centers had a direct vested interest in ignoring the origin of their wealth. They became unreachable. Their money, once legalized, bought lawyers, lobbyists, and public relations consultants who ensured they were seen not as thieves, but as international investors and philanthropists repeating the Rockefeller strategy. The impact of this wealth is global and destructive. The oligarchs use their financial power to fund wars and proxy conflicts in strategic regions, support populist politicians and movements in Western nations, and ensure that international sanctions are always less effective than they should be. Their palaces in Kensington, their private jets, and their towers in Manhattan are not merely symbols of ostentation. They are outposts of geopolitical power. The money they siphoned from Russia through the crime of fraudulent privatization is now used as a weapon of instability against the democracies that gave them refuge. They are living proof that, in the 21st century, true power is no longer in the possession of armies or industrial production, but in the ability to move and launder money on a massive scale and with total impunity. Their crime is no longer in the shadows. It is the accepted currency in the world's most respectable markets. They didn't just steal assets. They corrupted the very concept of global financial transparency. Today, sitting at the center of their global financial web of power, the oligarchs represent the most evolved and dangerous form of corporate crime. State crime that becomes international businessware. The fortune built on the ruin of a nation buys a seat at the table of global power. We have reached the end of our journey behind the scenes of great wealth, Rockefeller, Escobar, Kennedy, the oath, separated by centuries, continents, and crimes. They are, nonetheless, different chapters of the same book. A book written in invisible ink, one that rarely makes it to classrooms or the nightly news. They represent the uncomfortable truth that capitalism, in its rawest, most unregulated stages, is not just a market system. It is a power system. They broke the rules that govern most of us, rules of fair competition, of moral boundaries, and of respect for human life, and in doing so, they ensured they would write the new rules that govern the world. Some destroyed lives and communities with abject cruelty, like Escobar. Others built and financed the very institutions that define modern civilization, like Rockefeller, whose fortunes still sustain science and education. Joseph Kennedy demonstrated that money of illicit origin is the fastest catalyst for legitimate political power. And the oligarchs showed us that, in the 21st century, national-scale plunder is the new frontier of global crime. Validated and protected by the great financial centers of the West, all of them proved a single, unsettling truth. Fortunes built on crime do not just survive. They evolve. They change shape, exchanging the smell of gunpowder and oil for perfume and marble. And with time, they become history itself. Money, after all, has no morals. It has memory. And the memory of these fortunes resides in the foundation of hospitals, the beauty of the Manhattan skylines, and the silent influence of an offshore holding company in Cyprus. The question that remains for us now is not whether they were good or evil. The question is, do we accept that this is the story? Do we accept that the foundation of so much progress and power is, in its essence, the absence of law and the presence of unrestrained greed? Reflect on the names, on the fortunes, and on the crimes. Which of these fortunes, Rockefeller's monopolistic, Escobar's not, Kennedy's bootlegging, or the oligarchs' state plundering, shocked you the most by its capacity to transform into legitimate power? Leave your comment below. The conversation about who truly runs the world continues. To dive into more hidden empires and uncover the secrets of the most powerful, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. The next chapter of the archives of hidden fortunes is coming soon.